First of all, just a few hours ago, we found out Trevor Lawrence will be headed to IR, which very likely means that for the rest of the season, Mac Jones will be the quarterback for the Jacksonville Jaguars. And I sent that information to a group chat I'm in, and the immediate response was, shoot, Brian Thomas Jr. is going to be useless in fantasy. But we'll talk about that a little bit here in a second. But first of all, let's start back at the beginning. Chus, this injury happened, this concussion that put Trevor Lawrence in injured reserve was caused by linebacker Azeez Al-Shaair. We've been talking about Azeez Al-Shaair a lot. This is Azeez Al-Shaair, linebacker. Two different people, completely different.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. But this was Azeez Al-Shaair, linebacker for the Houston Texans. First of all, did you think the hit was dirty? Have you seen the video? Have you seen the play?
Oh, I thought it was 100% dirty. I mean, okay. I definitely think that it was. I mean, he laid into him like just head to head. I mean, it didn't look clean at all. I mean, sometimes you can kind of be like, maybe. I mean, everybody's been talking about it. I mean, when we talked about the suspension in the Chargers game with the Steelers, with like on Muth and stuff like that, I felt like that was a little. I didn't see that as much as a suspension, and that's like I'm just comparing that as like, oh, that shouldn't have been necessarily a suspension. I mean, he had a track record for it, but this one, I mean, he has a track record and it looked dirty. So, I mean, you get double whammied, and on top of that, Trevor Lawrence exited the game, and now he's out for the rest, more than likely the rest of the season. I 100% think it was dirty. I mean, if you want to like throw in if it was targeting or not, I mean, that's one thing or another. Maybe he wasn't intentionally targeting per se, but he was just going in, laying in for a big hit. Either way, it did not look good. Yeah, I can say that. It did not look good.
Yeah. I think, and Kurt Benkert actually responded to my tweet on this. I commented on his tweet and he responded back to me. And we discussed it a little bit. He was saying like Azeez has the right to maintain his spot and, protect that first down line, which he does. I agree with that part. But I think where the issue was when Trevor began to slide, and there were other people arguing like the slide rule shouldn't exist. We can debate that later on, but right now the slide rule does exist. And so when Trevor began his slide, Azeez still appeared to kind of dig his forearm into the head of Trevor Lawrence. And that's where the problem is. And Azeez, to his credit, whether he means it or not, I don't know. We can't know that. Has come out and apologized.
Which is good.
Is good. And there have been some horrible jokes made about Azeez and his faith, and that's not cool. There's stuff that shouldn't be happening, no matter what. But the fact is, Azeez Al-Shaair has had a history, like you alluded to, of these dirty hits, and he has been, I don't know that he's been suspended before, but he's definitely been fined before for this. And that is something that the NFL VP came out and said that came to into consideration when they were coming up with the suspension. Now, I think the Houston Texans GM also made a good point, and I want to ask you about this.
Yeah.
He said there is inconsistency in the fines and the suspensions that NFL players receive. And he's brought up Brian Branch. He brought up Derwin James. He brought up a bunch of different players. Do you think that there is inconsistency in the penalties that the NFL is laying out?
Oh, 100%. I mean, it is quite apparent. I mean, I think they need to be a little bit more consistent and look, because I feel like if you go back and watch a bunch of different games, and it can be a random game that means nothing, and it can be a primetime game, like whatever, you have Lions and Texans or something like that. It wasn't obviously Lions and Texans, but like you throw out a primetime game or a big game, something like that, or it could be a smaller game. There is a lot of similarities in some of these hits that some of these players are putting on these other players, and they're getting suspended for it, and nobody's talking about them. And then there's ones where people are like, that was a crazy dirty hit, and then the NFL just doesn't do anything about it. They just look away and they're like, oh, it wasn't. And I think he does have a good point with the consistency thing, because I think initially at the beginning of the season, I thought that the NFL was cracking down on it because obviously, as I've mentioned before, I can't think of his name off the top of my head, that Chargers player that got suspended for that hit on Freiermuth.
Was that Derwin James Jr.?
It was, yeah. And I know he has, had a track record too with some hits before, but I think him getting, I thought at the beginning of the season, I was like it happened and everyone was like, really? Like Freiermuth got up, he went with the next play. I mean, this is a very different situation, but Derwin James got suspended for what, couple games, 2 games, or at least one, I know for a fact. And it was like, really? Like, I don't want to say soft necessarily, but like there's ones that are like kind of questionable where you're like, okay, maybe. And then what?
One game.
Okay. So like you have like the ones that get suspended one game and it's like, okay, well, it didn't really do a lot. And then there's ones where it's like certain things happen. And I feel like just suspending and fines and everything in general just don't make any sense. I think another thing that's kind of crazy is like the unsportsmanlike conducts too. I want to throw that out there too with George Pickens and Josh Allen. There's a comparison. George Pickens got an unsportsmanlike conduct for pointing in the crowd with 2 fingers like this, form of what looked like a gun, and he got unsportsmanlike conduct. Josh Allen did the same thing, but just didn't have his middle finger in it, and he got nothing. So there's points where it's like, where do you draw the line? Where do you suspend people? Where do you get people in trouble? Do they have to have a track record in order for you to get like long-term suspensions and fines? Do you have to like fly under the radar with some of these hits? And do you have to be like mediocre and like have bad, like, I mean, I'm just curious because like, there's just some really weird hits in the NFL, and there's been some really weird like penalties and different things like that just, I feel like are inconsistent. And I feel like that's been going on in the NFL for years. And I think they need to crack down on it. I thought they were going to crack more down on it with the Chargers because, like I said, I thought that suspension was a little soft. So I figured, okay, yeah, they're just laying out all kinds of suspensions this season. This will be known as the year of suspensions for literally everything. And then everything kind of fell off for a little bit. And then there were some other hits that you see on there. I can't name them off the top of my head, but I'm sure somebody out there could nitpick a certain hit somewhere in the last 80 games that have been played this entire season and probably tell me that there was a dirty hit in there that probably should have been at least on the same level of Derwin James. It should have been a suspension. Maybe not Shaair, but still where you're like, okay, yeah, maybe. So in the end of the day, I rest my case, but yeah, I definitely think there's some inconsistencies, and I don't know if you agree or not, but
I do. I think, and obviously the NFL likes being in the media, so maybe this is part of that. Maybe they like people talking about the refs and dragging on the refs. But I think if the NFL wants to take the refs seriously, they should come out with a chart or some sort of like, just categorical list that says like, hey, if this happens, this is the fine or penalty. If this happens, this is the fine or penalty. Because the same thing happened with Andre Yoshibas. He got fined for the bow and arrow celebration. But Travis Kelce does that all the time. And now to the NFL's credit, they did withdraw that fine. But it was like, okay,
why'd you do it in the first place?
The players need to know what they can do. And then, same thing. Maybe, and this is just an example list. I haven't gone deep into this at all. This is just top of my head, but like say, hey, if you have this late hit on a player and it results in them being knocked out a few plays and it's considered a dirty hit, that's going to be this penalty. If it knocks them out of the game or knocks them unconscious, like the Trevor Lawrence, what appeared to be knocked out for a little bit, that's obviously worse. That's going to be different categorically. So that's something the NFL needs to do, I believe, to help both the players and the fans understand what's going on. Also, we don't need to get into this, but hip drop tackles were supposed to be a way bigger thing. How many penalties have you seen for hip drop tackles this year?
Way more fines.
Yeah. They're just fining players later. There have been multiple times this year where Jamar Chase has been hip drop tackled, and fans have been like, "Hey, isn't that what that's supposed to be?" And then the NFL comes out after the game and is like, "Oh yeah, he was hip drop tackled like 4 times in that game. So here's some fines." But anyway, this just goes back to the whole conversation. The NFL officiating needs completely revamped, and we can talk about that deeper at a later time.